All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. This webinar is part of the Unpacking Coaching webinar series presented by the National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations. My name's Mary Louise Himmeter, and I'm going to be your host today. So today's topic is called Coaching the Coach, Building Capacity for Practice-Based Coaching. And just as it's important to support educators, it's also important to support coaches. And we hear a lot from coaches about how they want and need support. So today, our presenters are going to talk about how they have done that as part of one of our projects as an example of ways to think about how you might support coaches. So with that, and having said all of that, I'm thrilled to be able to turn this over to our two presenters. I'm so excited to have Gia and Amanda here. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Gia.
Perfect. Thanks, ML. So I am Gia Welsh. I'm so excited to be here and talk about this topic that I know is very dear to my heart. I am an early childhood school psychologist, and I first came across pyramid model back when I was living in Pennsylvania in 2010 when I was working for an agency that received federal stimulus funds and determined that we were going to implement pyramid model. So I learned about that as I jumped into this work and figured out how to support pyramid model in the county in which I was living. And like so many of you, of course, I discovered that pyramid model definitely embodied everything that I believed in. So I began implementing pyramid model by providing trainings and by supporting both program coaches and practitioner coaches in a variety of different early childhood settings. And then was lucky enough to become a member of the state leadership team, which was a team of individuals throughout the state who worked together to build an infrastructure for pyramid model implementation. And that was an amazing experience. So fast forward, moved to California, and last year moved to work at Sonoma County Office of Education to be the local lead for ML's EIR expansion grant, where we were really looking at pyramid model training paired with coaching, a high level of coaching. Here in California, it was transitional kindergarten settings and kindergarten settings. So began that work. We had a team of the equivalent of 4 full-time coaches doing this work. So was able to connect with all of these amazing people at the national level. And walking into this webinar now, I was thinking about it. And after being a part of this project and working with, the folks from Vanderbilt and USF, that's really been a game changer. So this approach that Amanda and I are going to talk about and share with you today has really broadened and deepened my ideas about how to meaningfully support coaches. So that being said, I'm going to turn it over to the amazing Amanda, who was one of the 2 national coaches who were supporting our team of coaches here in California and in Nebraska.
Oh, thank you. And it was my honor and pleasure to work with Gia and Pam in Nebraska and their amazing teams. I'm Amanda Tamani. I'm a learning and development facilitator at the University of South Florida. I have been in early childhood education, primarily early childhood special education, for a long time. I was introduced to pyramid model practices before practice-based coaching was a thing. Way back. So I'm excited to be here and to have lived and shared this experience with Gia. And so that being said, I have implemented pyramid model practices in my own classroom. I was a classroom teacher for about 15 years. I worked at the district level supporting teachers and coaching teachers, and then at the state level, and now doing this amazing work. So let's jump in. I'm so excited. Here's what we're going to do. We are going to talk about what Gia and I love to call coachversations, because it was really this collaborative partnership and these conversations that help to build their capacity to support coaching and to support the implementation of pyramid model practices. So we've had our welcome and introduction. We're going to talk about the scope and sequence, which you'll have access to. We'll talk a little bit about that. But that was kind of a guiding document that we used to implement and support coaching in California and Nebraska. And we will definitely touch on the importance of that connection, that planning and reflection. So we're so excited to jump in and share that today. So we'll start by talking about this collaborative process that we worked through with the scope and sequence. The scope and sequence is a document that we're going to share with you, but I have to acknowledge we're going to be talking a lot about the royal we, but it was Andrea Riddle and I who stood on the shoulders of giants, right? Previous iterations of this project provided so many resources, a wealth of knowledge, and activities that we use to help build out what we like to call the scope and sequence to support coaches as they implemented practice-based coaching. It provided topics, concepts, and materials to help with the implementation of practice-based coaching, right? And it was a clear progression of activities and goals and supports that were aligned with those pyramid model practices because we wanted to ensure that consistency across coaching. So although we were able to use the books that you see listed on the slide, so we use the resources, the Essentials of Practice-Based Coaching and Unpacking Pyramid Model, I want to emphasize that there are so many resources on the Challenging Behavior website, on NCPMI's website, that we used as well. So the practice-based coaching collection, the resource collections were available, so many resources available there as well, handouts and guides that you can find and access as well as you kind of tweak this document and make it your own. I also want to emphasize the importance of becoming familiar with the website and those resources as you work to support coaches and build that coaching capacity. We began by establishing a structure for our meetings with the coaches. So we met weekly with the coaches and with Gia and her team, with Pam and her team. And we knew through implementing pyramid model practices the importance of setting up a structure and a routine. So it included a way for the coaches to check in, for us to celebrate successes, but really thinking too about that intentionality of timely support, or what we like to call just-in-time support. That was intentional, that we put that early in our structure so that we could acknowledge and let the coach's needs guide our support as well. So yes, we responded to their needs and we wanted to be timely, but we also wanted to be prepared. So we had a coach focus as well, prepared every week to unpack with them, and also talking about next steps, really concrete next steps for them. Like just like you do when you're coaching teachers, you want those concrete next steps in that action plan. We wanted to do the same thing for coaches. So we knew it was important in our work together, and I am a norm nerd. So we worked together to establish norms and we used them. We didn't just hang them up or put them on a slide. And, Gia can talk about this as we go through the process as well, but we really used those norms and relied heavily on them as we went through this. As you're beginning to support coaches, I want to highlight a couple of things. That coach focus at the beginning included things like planning orientation sessions with the teachers, thinking about what is coaching going to look like, coaching agreements, unpacking the coaching essentials, looking at coaching preferences, not just for coaches with their teachers and practitioners, but also for us supporting the coaches. So really digging into that as well and thinking about that. Again, we wanted to be really concrete when we talked about our structure, giving them some concrete next steps, things like reviewing and becoming familiar with the classroom essentials, right? Reviewing implementation guides, reviewing the resources, identifying caseloads. Those were some things that we knew would be helpful at the very beginning as we established that structure and got things going. What you see on the other side of the slide, and I'll talk more about planning, we also knew it was important because implementing practice-based coaching has taught us to have some guiding questions to think about, to dig into that reflective process and think about being prepared to think about reflection and feedback. So Gia, I'm curious, how did that structure work for you and your team? What was helpful? Make sure you unmute. We can't hear your beautiful voice.
Thank you. Thinking about what I did previously in the first iteration of this, way back beginning in 2010, I had check-ins with coaches individually, gave that as needed support, consistent communication, which were all really helpful and valuable approaches. But having the structure of a consistent agenda each time we met really allowed us to not just have questions answered, but intentionally and systematically ensured that we touched on each of those important elements. As Amanda said, paying attention to how everyone was feeling and covering important content, space for reflection. We had all of that built into the agenda. And I always, every single time I talk about pyramid model, I inevitably start thinking about the parallel process. And we know the importance in pyramid model of having an established routine and how important that is for coaches with teachers and for teachers with children. And so I think it makes perfect sense that having that set routine in supporting coaches was incredibly important as well and really, really helpful.
I love that you touched on the idea of the parallel process because that lets me segue so nicely into planning to plan. And I'm going to talk about that. In the next few minutes, you'll hear me talk about the fact that I'm very task oriented. I like structure. So we really learned to plan, and then plan some more. As we worked with this amazing group of coaches, Andrea and I spent a lot of time, and I would say at least an hour each week, planning, preparing, going through the resources, but also reflecting and listening to what the coaches needed. To support Gia's coaching capacity, it was really important for me to take the time to get to know Gia. And I have to touch back on that practice-based coaching cycle, collaborative relationships, right? So it was important for me as a very task-oriented person, right? Love my scope and sequence. I had to slow down and take the time to get to know Gia, to learn some of the context that she shared so beautifully with you, right? To understand her working context of where she had been, her understanding of pyramid model, her understanding of practice-based coaching, and some ahas that I had from really building that collaborative partnership and connecting and listening was that she and I had a lot of similar backgrounds and work experiences. So it laid the foundation and helped me be able to build her capacity and really understand where she was coming from. So as we implemented this, I got excited. I get excited just talking about it because it helped me move from being very task oriented to really digging into process and digging into reflection. And we'll talk about that as we go through how important that is in really moving the needle in terms of making practices change. Really listening to Gia, listening to the coaches, helped me see how willing they were to learn. Oh my gosh, they were so excited about implementing pyramid model practices and open to feedback. So Gia, I'm wondering, what was that process like for you of building that collaborative relationship, both as a coachee, but also as someone who was supporting coaches?
Yeah. And as you said, again, that parallel process, love that that was honored by you and Andrea as we went through it. Um, all of those relationship skills, I think, that we emphasize in pyramid model work were definitely embodied by you guys. There was a lot of listening and reflecting and taking the time to have those conversations. So even though we had that set agenda, that there was definitely time intentionally devoted to providing to having those conversations, providing supportive feedback, providing that positive descriptive feedback, and just really appreciated how that helped to build the relationships that we were forming with you and Andrea as you coached us, and also among us. I think modeling that and having that be an intentional part of what we were doing made a huge difference.
Ah, I love it. And thanks for sharing that because it was really evident. That was so evident to us as we worked with you all and went through this process, because in the spirit of implementing pyramid model practices, we saw quickly and were very intentional about setting the stage for coaches by using the practices and the structures, right? So thinking about, for example, the check-in, using those practices like the check-ins and checking in about feelings. At first, we were thinking, okay, we want to model it, but we realized as we implemented it, how important it was in building a relationship and seeing not just, how you were feeling, but how were you feeling about where we were with coaching, where we were with the project, how things were going for you all. And so it really helped us tune into what your needs were. And just like you said, other things like positive descriptive feedback, it helped us be mindful, to deliver it, and also receive some of it as well. I mean, that was really helpful. It helped us, I think, too, as we implemented and set the stage to be intentional about those pyramid model practices of, giving visuals, universal design for learning, recognizing that we wanted to be mindful of the different learning styles of the coaches. And it was really through things like implementing that feelings check-in that helped us become aware of, yes, this is something we do with children, but as we implemented these structures with adults, we really began to see the value of how we were building and modeling practice-based coaching and implementing those pyramid model practices. We spent some time, a lot of time, going through and culling the resources. And as we talk about supporting coaches, I want to emphasize, take the time as a person who's, supporting coaches to really comb through your resources, be familiar with them, but also give the coaches time to process those resources. So sending them out ahead of time, really allowing the coaches time to become familiar, talk it through, listening to their feedback about those resources so that we could tweak it and individualize it and really help them use it to support their teachers. So Gia, I'm wondering, what was that like for you? How was it helpful as we set the stage? What was that experience like for you and for your team?
Yeah. So, as you said, there are so many rich resources out there, and having people who are really knowledgeable about them and knew about the array of resources available, and where to access them, that was invaluable. And I also loved that a lot of the resources the coaches were able to modify, and that we were able to make them our own and create or even co-create resources. And as I was thinking about this, Amanda, I was thinking about one of our final sessions. We had that opportunity to showcase unique resources that the coaches had used or developed, focused on a variety of coaching areas. So, resources that we used or created around data collection, classroom handouts for teachers, ideas for building relationships with teachers. There were so many amazing ideas. And I don't think that's a part, like a standard part of that scope and sequence, but it was such a brilliant idea. And it was a really great opportunity to celebrate the creativity and thoughts and amazing skills of this group of coaches. And a really great opportunity for the coaches to learn from one another about some valuable tools that they had either discovered or created to support our work as coaches. So I think just emphasizing the importance of all of the amazing things that are out there and being able to create or modify them was really helpful.
I love it because it's a great segue to make the point that, it's a scope and sequence, it's a guide, right? It's not a recipe. This was a living, breathing document. And just like Gia said, as Andrea and I were learning and getting feedback, and having reflective conversations with the coaches, really, building those relationships. We updated that scope and sequence every week as we planned. And then as we would get feedback from the coaches about what worked for them, we were updating that as we went along and taking lessons to use with other coaches. So absolutely, it's a guide. It's not a recipe. And we wanted to make sure that we addressed the nitty-gritty as well. So we've talked about, those broad practices and the power of that collaborative relationship. We also wanted to make sure that we talked about the nitty-gritty. As you're planning and preparing for supporting coaches, prepare for 2 hours of meeting time, but also think about the time that you need as the one calling the resources, making sure that you've got time to prepare it as well. And make the coaches aware. We learned early on it's so important to be transparent and say, hey, this week we know we're going to take the full 2 hours, or maybe as we only need 10 minutes less than that, so we're going to give you the gift of 10 minutes back. So really being transparent about that and providing the information. And again, universal design for learning, being mindful of learning styles, having visuals, notes, handouts. And I would encourage repetition is okay. We all need some repetition. So that was okay as well. But also we learned, have fun, celebrate early, celebrate often. Those were really some tips that I think we wanted to make sure we put in here as we talk about broader things as well. But Gia, I'm wondering, how did that time work for you? I know it's hard to squeeze that time out of a schedule. What was that like for the coaches?
Yeah, it was fabulous. I think dedicated time for doing this really hard, really important work is essential. And it definitely took a lot of time, especially in the first half of the year. So I think protecting that time made a huge difference, and I wouldn't change that at all. And in fact, locally, we actually allotted an additional hour following the 2 hours to give our team a chance to review the information presented, review the forms that were provided, process what we heard, thinking about that UDL. Some people really wanted to talk about it and go over it, clarify things, and then to discuss how it might apply to specific teachers or to specific situations. So dedicating that time made a big difference. As with the meetings with Amanda and Andrea, the ones that you guys were using to support us, I think we always used the full 2 hours in the beginning of the year. And towards the end of the year, we often did not use all that time. But I think everybody really appreciated that. And the same was true locally, that extra hour, that the need for that definitely diminished over time. So I think it was really helpful to have that dedicated space to dive into the coaching work in a really thoughtful manner. And I think it can only really be done well if you have committed that time. So it made a big difference, and so glad that we made sure that we protected those 2 hours every week.
Hey, you guys, I have a question for you, kind of related to a question, which is how did you guys address issue did you address issues that kind of came up organically, or I don't know if that's the right word, that coaches were having, like a teacher who was challenging or finding time to coach, whatever the issue was? How did y'all address those kind of things?
I love it. What a great question. And when I go back to thinking about our structure and how we structured our time, we learned quickly that it was important for us to, first of all, reach out ahead of time to the coaches and say, are you having any troubles, anything specific you want to make sure that we talk about? And sometimes things happen, on that morning before the meeting. So we again, had that scope and sequence, but we would pause and take the time at the very beginning. So that just in time Q&A at the very beginning before we dug into, oh, this is what Amanda and Andrea think we need to talk about today. But to allow the time for that exact thing. What's going on? What do you want to address? And sometimes if we didn't have the resources readily available, we could say to the coaches, we don't have that right now, but we're going to make sure that we address it with you first thing next week. Gia, you want to?
Yeah, definitely. I think it goes back to your point about being flexible. And it was really, I think it was so important that you had a pulse on where the coaches were with this coaching journey and took that into consideration. So we had that set agenda, and one of the agenda items was just in time support. And then sometimes there was a few things that we wanted to cover afterwards. And I remember some sessions where we just really dedicated a lot of time to the just in time support because there were issues that had cropped up that needed to be addressed. So the meetings never felt like a presentation. Again, it was that coach for station where we had that agenda, which was really helpful, but it was constantly modified depending on the needs of everybody in the group.
And then just one follow-up, because I'm looking at questions people have. What were the kinds of just-in-time needs coaches had? Was it about just finding time for coaching? Was it about how to support a particular teacher? Was it around children? What were the kind of issues that came up that you didn't necessarily know were going to come up, maybe?
I love that question because I am so ready for you. Well, really, at first, it was about logistics. Initially, it was a lot about logistics, about things like where to upload, how to upload, technology. Uh, but it also led to great conversations as, again, we treated that scope and sequence as a living, breathing document. We would set aside what we thought we needed to focus on and really dig into, for example, reflective conversations. What was the difference? What were some of these coaching strategies as coaches would talk about resistance from teachers? And actually, that didn't come up until later. I felt like that came up really later in the process. Initially, it was a lot about just logistics, technology, making sure, and the coaches were just so passionate and wanted so much to make sure that they were supporting teachers in a responsive way. So making sure they had resources for that, making sure that they could, this is where like Gia was so fabulous about collaborating with us on, can we change this? What do you think about this? Can you give us feedback on that? And I want to say too, Gia's a fabulous, and Pam as well. What great communicators. So keeping that open door, like text us, email us, we're here for you. And, trying to be flexible because we were sometimes in different time zones, but being flexible about meetings so that we could make sure we were responsive. Gia, any other thoughts?
I, I think something that is important to say is that the most of that happened during the group, but it was also really important that there was the availability to pose questions in between those sessions, and have things, especially immediate things addressed, or to just send you thoughts so that then those could become a part of that coming week's agenda. So having those check-ins were also really helpful.
How often did these meetings happen?
They were
We
every week.
Oh, they were every week. Someone was asking that. Okay. And then one other question that people are raising is, and I mean, I want to preface this by saying that the people on this project, for the most part, who were coaching were pretty much full-time coaches. That wasn't true for all of the coaches, but it was for the majority of them. But people are asking about whether coaches were having trouble kind of being pulled away from coaching to do other things, and whether y'all ran into that issue and how you supported coaches around that.
So I think the fact that they were there dedicated to this project eliminated some of that. We did have some coaches who split their time. I think they found a lot of the coaching support that they got contributed to what they were being pulled away from too. And they were able to use a lot of those coaching skills in the other facets of their professional lives. But we didn't have too much of that because it was kind of an ideal situation where most people were dedicated to doing this work.
That's a great question, though, because I think early in the process, as we talked about caseloads and what was reasonable, we were able to have really good conversations with Gia and Pam. And just through that process, the importance of having that dedicated person, but also adjusting, because Gia was the queen of being flexible. And she'll talk about that in a minute. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, but she will address that beautifully. Yes.
All right, thanks you guys. Sorry that I kind of took us off course, but those were some
Good points.
good
Yeah.
popping up. Yeah.
No, that's fabulous. I love it. Love it. Because it leads beautifully into the next part of what we wanted to talk about. Can we talk about pyramid model and practice-based coaching without talking about data, reflection, and responsiveness? The big D, the big R. I got to talk about the coaching log. And I will say, as my cat is saying, guilty as charged on both counts. And in my past as a coach, there were times where I thought, oh, I got to fill out that coaching log. I got to get that done. And I looked at it as, just task, right? Amanda being task oriented. What I realized through this process, and as some of the questions earlier kind of were getting to this, so I was really excited that you guys were thinking along these lines as we talked about, what were kind of some of the issues that the coaches brought forward. It is important to take the time to unpack the coaching log. It is a job aid, not a compliance tool. And when you treat it as a job aid, it's a tool, it's not a script. However, what a powerful tool, right? So be prepared for questions about every part of that coaching log. That's one thing I learned. Andrea and I, you think, oh, here's the box for this and the box for that. We really took the time, and it was their feedback from the coaches and their questions that helped us realize this is a job aid. This is really something that can help them dig into coaching. And I'll give you an example. One of the brilliant coaches came in and had a question about filling out the time the session started. And I thought, oh, that's a straightforward answer. But the more we use some reflective conversation to dig into why she was asking that and what was kind of on her mind, she was like, and she's just so excited and so supportive of her teacher. I start supporting that teacher as soon as I walk in the classroom. We're having these conversations. So as we unpacked what was a reflective conversation, what were the important pieces of, that reflection and feedback, supportive conversation, supportive feedback, and constructive feedback. So then that led us into having really deep, good conversations about fidelity, about fidelity data to provide that supportive and constructive feedback. So really, Andrea and I were being honest and transparent and vulnerable as we talked about the uncomfortable parts of coaching, providing constructive feedback. And so just the log itself led to really unpacking every part of it and using it as a job aid to support coaching. And I could talk about it forever, but Gia, I'm really interested in hearing, what was your reflection on using the log? Did anything change for you as a process of using that and supporting the coaching?
Yeah, everything changed. So everything you said with about 20 exclamation points after it, Amanda. So I too will tell on myself that I definitely saw it as a data collection measure or a compliance tool. And I can still hear the brilliant Sue Zeider's voice, who Sue oversaw Pyramid Model in Pennsylvania, saying that we should really be using these coaching logs. And it was a really tough sell with our coaches. And then fast forward to this project, since it was a part of the project, we all, of course, used the coaching logs religiously. And it became clear very quickly that it was an incredible resource. In fact, I was meeting with one of our new coaches this year and going over the coaching log with him, and was so excited to be able to really showcase its value as as a really valuable job tool, because it's so, everything that you said, Amanda, so helpful in terms of supporting successful implementation of practice-based coaching. It supported us in intentionally and carefully, preparing for sessions, considering strategies during focused observations, supported all of the steps that are so important in a debrief session. All of that, in addition to being a really helpful data collection tool that can inform our practices and approaches going forward. And in fact, this year, when some of the requirements of the study have gone away and we have more flexibility in how we're approaching coaching, every single coach on our team agreed that we definitely want to continue using the coaching log exactly as we used it last year because it was so helpful. So huge fan, and definitely that's a big change from the way I used to perceive those logs.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Because when I think about that earlier question about what were some of those early questions about, a lot of it centered around the log. So really taking the time to unpack it and be intentional and thoughtful about it led to just some fabulous conversations that really move practice change forward, which
Yeah.
is what, you're right, that's what we're all about, which leads beautifully into what came about next, I think, is really listening to and getting that feedback. Yeah, and I watched Gia do this with her coaches, which Andrea and I realized, oh my gosh, we had this incredible community of coaches, this incredible group of people with knowledge, resources, fabulous questions, so thoughtful, so intentional. And we understood now what a great opportunity we had to mine those resources and encourage the coaches to collaborate. So we did things like bring your problem to work day. That's kind of what we called it, or a celebration of success. We encouraged the groups of coaches to kind of on their own, bring a problem. What is really being a sticky point for you right now? Bring it to the whole group. And then we took the time to really turn it over to them and let them brainstorm and support each other and problem solve. And one aha that we had was that, they were lifting each other up. They were improving each other's coaching practices and our coaching as well. And it was that reflection and feedback, time for problem solving. But it was really watching Gia also do that with her coaches that helped me go, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Gia, tell us more about it.
Yeah, so I loved being a part of a community of coaches. Most of my previous experience was coaching coaches individually, and definitely a lot of value in that. And probably if you had asked me previously, I would have said that that might be the more powerful approach. Here, I still created times when I could meet with coaches individually, which was really wonderful and had lots of benefits. But the group coaching was really amazing. Having that community to support one another, hear everybody's ideas, work together, co-create tools or co-create processes, that was all really invaluable. And I also realized that it really helps with sustainability because now when we have a team of people who can support this, when one of us isn't present, we can continue to do the important work of coaching coaches. So that sustainability element wasn't something that I hadn't anticipated, but that I think is really important. And Amanda, I loved the opportunities when we were able to bring a challenge or celebration and discuss that. It reminded me of the medical field. I worked at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia for a couple of years, and we would have rounds on a regular basis where we brought a case to discuss that highlighted a challenge or that we were encountering, something that was really difficult or something that went really often surprisingly well, and learned so much both when I was presenting a case and also when I could participate in the discussions of others. So that is going to be a standing agenda on our coaches agenda for this year because I really think that those opportunities to talk as a team and hear other people's ideas was so valuable, and would always want to figure out a way to have a community of coaches if you can't do it in person, can you do that virtually? How can you do that to continue that work of networking with others who are engaged again in that really fabulous and often challenging work of coaching?
Oh, beautiful. I love it. Love it. And it helps me think about just the beauty of practice-based coaching and connect it back to pyramid model practices, right? Building relationships, listening and responding and being open to feedback. Definitely the fidelity feedback piece, and this is the other part, as you're thinking about supporting coaches. One benefit that Andrea and I had, not only did we get feedback from Gia as someone supporting coaches and from the coaches, but we got feedback on our feedback. Right. So always thinking about as you're talking, and I love Gia that you talked about sustainability. Who's coaching the coaches? Who's supporting the supporters? So building that in to your scope and sequence. And that was a big aha that Andrea and I had, was really building in more time for the collaborative process, really digging into that fidelity feedback to help focus on again, on those parts of coaching that can be uncomfortable, but we know can help teachers change practices. So Andrew and I have reflected and gone back to that scope and sequence and updated it to make sure that we were embedding more opportunities for reflection and for reflective conversations. Again, that supportive feedback is so powerful. We want to give positive descriptive feedback, but we also know it's okay to say, and here's some things we can do better. We can provide more opportunities for that collaborative problem solving. So it was exciting to see it unfold as we were doing it. So I'm wondering, Gia, what was that like for you and for your teams? How did you support the coaches as we worked through that process of sharing feedback and being uncomfortable and unpacking all of that?
Yeah, so it was so nice. I think the coordinator's position originally didn't coach any teachers, but both Pam and I, my counterpart in Nebraska, because of various circumstances, did end up participating in coaching at least one teacher. And so we were able to live what the teachers were living. And both were incredibly grateful for that. And we also had that opportunity to receive fidelity feedback. So just a little pivot to explain how fidelity feedback worked. We had our sessions recorded, audio recordings, and then our coaches logs were uploaded. And someone would listen to the sessions and give fidelity feedback to every coach based on at least one session per week. And the feedback wasn't just a number, such as, you had 92% fidelity. Again, that parallel process, right? They provided us with both supportive and constructive feedback and gave really concrete suggestions for going forward or expanding coaching practices. So, for example, I think a lot of us, as you said, Amanda, often received constructive feedback on giving constructive feedback because that's an area that many of us found to be challenging. And it was so helpful to have that extra set of ears help us think about the specific words that we might use to have those conversations with teachers. So coaching a teacher and receiving that feedback, I think, helped to strengthen my skills as a coach of teachers, of course, but also as a coach of coaches. And going forward and thinking about that fidelity, we know that recording every session and getting fidelity feedback once a week is probably not a very realistic goal. But we're definitely going to implement fidelity check-ins periodically so that we can prevent that drift and just on an ongoing basis ensure that we're adhering to practice-based coaching with fidelity. It was a pretty amazing experience.
Gia, I want to just comment on that a little bit so we're getting some questions about caseloads and time and stuff like that. And I think, as I said at the beginning, this was part of a project. And so we had way better resources to do this than the average school system or program is going to have. And I think that Gia, that last point you made, I think is so important from the perspective of if you can't give coaches feedback on a regular basis, you they have to get feedback at least sometimes, right? And so one thing, the way that we did feedback on in this work was that they recorded themselves, someone listened to it, and then someone sent them feedback, right? So you can think about how you could embed that into whoever is responsible for supporting coaches in your program. So just, there's the way to do it if you had all the resources in the world, but there's also the way, well, that wasn't all, but if you had a lot of resources versus what can you do reasonably well without as many resources. The other question that is coming up quite a bit is about caseloads. And um, it would take me the rest of this webinar to answer the question about what are kind of reasonable caseloads, because it depends on, are you coaching four teachers who are in the same childcare center, or are you coaching teachers that you have to drive a long distance between? Are you coaching teachers who are in half-day programs versus full-day programs? Are you doing it virtually? All of those things. But the bottom line is that if you're expecting coaches to see teachers regularly, every week, every other week, it really takes a morning to do a coaching visit between, if you kind of think about the length of time it takes to do the observation, prepare, and have a debriefing session. And so that's what you have to think about in terms of how much coaching can one person do, right? Also depends on if you're going to do group coaching or peer coaching, or if it's all going to be individual coaching. And maybe we'll talk about that on another webinar. But I wanted to just throw those things in as y'all are talking about supporting coaches and Fidelity and those things that might seem a bit harder in kind of everyday community-based programs.
I appreciate that you addressed it, and that we, really think about it. And Gia, I appreciate how intentional you were in thinking about it moving forward with sustainability. So, a great question. And again, that scope and sequence is, there to be edited and customized and made your own, for sure.
Sorry, one more question.
Mhm.
Oh,
No, there you go.
perfect.
Yeah.
So another question that someone is asking is about resources and what are some really good resources that you provided to coaches? Do you have some suggestions or recommendations around resources?
Thank you for asking. The practice, there is a resource collection actually that came out within the last year, but the practice-based coaching resource collection was so helpful to us because everything was in one place. It was a hyperlinked document that led to, other resources for us. That was incredible. That was just, it was right there at our fingertips. There's the implementation guide that's on NCPMI, the coaching implementation guide, that was fabulous, with just great, and right there available for you as well. There were coaching logs also on the website, although we use something slightly different. Still such a great tool for us to look at and talk about as we were preparing resources for them.
Yeah, and I would add to that the definitely the implementation guide. We use that a lot. Our coaches found that so helpful in working with teachers, highlighting certain pages, making sure that they had access to that. So that was fabulous. The other resource that was really wonderful were the guided action plans that exist. So there are action, we all have the templates for an action plan, but the fabulous NCPMI have developed guided action plans that cover so many practices, and their suggestions for kind of fill in the blank things that are very modifiable. So, we never felt like we had to use them exactly as is, but it gave great prompts for, what might your goal be? What are the steps that might help support implementation of those goals. So those guided action plans are fabulous.
Thank you. Um, uh, Amanda, did you have anything else to add before I was going to jump in with one more thing?
No, I don't. Thank you.
That was great, Gia. And Ashley has put some links into some of the things that Gia was just talking about. The other thing, and the other question we got, and I'm going to answer it, and then I just kind of, if Gia and Amanda, if y'all have anything else to say about this, just jump in. So someone is asking about qualifications for coaches, and we generally in our work say that we think it's important for coaches to have been classroom teachers, because if you're coaching classroom teachers, if you're coaching home visitors, that you've been a home visitor, right? Because we think it gets you a lot of credibility with the person you're coaching. If I can remember one of our coaches early on saying, when I was a teacher, I did this, right? And the teacher she was coaching just kind of lit up, right? That they understand that you've been there. We think it's really hard for you to coach on pyramid if you don't know pyramid. And so we really when we hire people, we try to hire people who have some understanding of pyramid. And if not, plan for them to have time to learn pyramid before they're expected to coach. So those are the things that we look for in coaches. I don't know, Gia or Amanda, if y'all have anything to add about just the qualifications of the coaches y'all have worked with and what have maybe made them effective coaches.
I would just echo everything that you said about being familiar with teaching early childhood, being familiar with pyramid model. Yes, absolutely. Gia, what do you think? Anything?
Just thinking, and even if you're not really familiar with pyramid model, do you kind of walk the walk, even if you don't necessarily know that it's pyramid model? And I agree, ML, having the time to kind of dive into those practices and learn about it is really helpful if you don't have that specific pyramid model training. So we had a range of coaches, some of whom had been giving pyramid model trainings and others who were not very familiar with it. But to a person, everybody definitely had that belief system of that aligned so beautifully with pyramid model.
Yeah, that's actually a really important point, I think, Gia, is that you can get to, when you're interviewing people to be coaches, you can get to what's their perspective on supporting children's social emotional development and behavior. And if you have someone who buys into a more punitive kind of approach to discipline, or maybe just a more traditional approach to discipline, that's probably not the best person to coach around pyramid. That might be a good person to coach around other things, but probably not around pyramid. So none of us are going to be lucky enough to find the perfect person who has coaching experience and teaching experience and knows pyramid. But I think trying to find people who have been in the context where they're going to be coaching and who buy into the approach is really important. Um, all right. I think that we are just about out of time. But thank you, everybody, for your participation and your questions. And hopefully we got to all of them. And Gia and Amanda, thank you for all of your great suggestions and content.
All right. Thank you so very much to our panelists for their wonderful insights. Your feedback is very important to the work that we do. Please remember to provide your feedback on this webinar with our post-webinar survey by typing the web address shown on this slide into your internet browser. Your certificate of attendance will appear once you submit the survey. We invite you to visit our website, challengingbehavior.org, to sign up for upcoming webinars, access recordings, download pyramid model resources, and more. Thank you to our funder for making this webinar possible. This concludes our webinar. Thank you all and have a great rest of your day.